Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. And it is a lecture number 3 of History of English Literature 1. And the topic of today's discussion is Elizabethan or Renaissance prose and poetry. Let's start our lecture. Yes, here we have the lecture outline, and the topics that we have to cover today are: what is prose? We will be looking into detail the definition of prose, which language is called as prose. Then we will discuss prose writers of Renaissance age, and what is poetry. We will discuss the definition of poetry and which form of language is called as poetry. Then there is particularly Renaissance poetry, followed by poets of the Renaissance age, and conclusion, reference. We will start with prose. Okay, what is a prose? Before reading these slides, I would like to tell you people that prose is a kind of writing which is straightforward. Prose is basically a Latin word which means straightforward. So it is a kind of straightforward language which is written in the form of sentences, phrases and clauses, and it does not have a poetic structure. I mean, it does not have rhythm and rhyme in it. So it is totally opposite to the poetry. So prose is a form of language that has no formal metrical structure. It applies a natural flow of speech and ordinary grammatical structure rather than rhythmic structure, such as in case of traditional poetry. Prose is a form of language. It means it does not have metrical structure. It does not have meter, rhythm, rhyme as it is in the poetry. So it shows just the natural flow of speech, the way I am speaking right now. If I start writing this speech, so it will be like, it will become your prose. So if I narrate something like some kind of a rhyme, some kind of a poem, so it will be a different structure. All right, so the way I am communicating, I am speaking right now, if I start writing, it will be a prose. Okay, it has only ordinary grammatical structure instead of rhythmic structure which is characteristics or which is found in the traditional poetry. Next we have prose writers of Renaissance age. We have two prose writers that are found in Renaissance age. So since we have to talk about poetry and the prose, so I'll discuss poetry later on, because in poetry we have 5 poets and in prose we have 2. So I thought that we should discuss it first. John Lilly and Sir Philip Sidney. Okay, John Lilly. One of the original prose writers of Elizabethan age, John Lilly was the most famous. There were other prose writers as well of this age, not only the John Lilly and Sir Philip Sidney, but there were other prose writers as well. So since they were the most famous, that is why we just study in detail about them. Rest, they are just the names. Okay, in 1578, the publication of his curious book Euphues, The Anatomy of Wit, and its sequel entitled Euphues and His England in 1580 created a sensation. What happened at that time? At that time, there happened a publication of the book, that is Euphues, The Anatomy of Wit. It's the name of the book, all right, and its sequel was Euphues and His England, and these both books were written and created in 1580. As a result, these books created sensation. They were widely liked by people of the England. So that is why the thing which become popular, it means that the writers of the books also become popular. Although the books contained love stories with their thin plots, they were intended to be read as books of conduct for aristocratic youth. These books, they had the love stories, but what was their purpose? They were considered a good books by the aristocratic class. Aristocratic class means the people belonging to the upper class. So these books were considered as books of conduct for aristocratic youth people. So like moral books or love stories, although they had some kind of moral, so the aristocratic youth were made to read such books so that they also get some kind of lessons. And then they developed this habit of dealing with the people, so that they know that how they have to behave in public. So that is why these books were intentionally read by, or they were made to read by aristocratic youths, book of John Lilly. Which books? Euphues, The Anatomy of Wit, and its sequel, that is Euphues and His England. Through these two books, Lilly introduced an inimitable and unique style known as Euphuism, marks him as a pioneer. Inimitable means matchless. So he brought such a matchless and unique style in English literature that his Euphuism it started acknowledging as Euphuism. Euphuism is some kind of polite words, you know. For example, when we say that he is an old man, so instead of saying old man, which is some kind of, which may with the old person may feel that he has been secluded from the society and he is some kind of person who is such an old man that he cannot do anything. So instead of calling them old man, we can also call them as senior citizens. So it means that, so senior citizen is comparatively a better word instead of old man. So that is what we call as euphemism, just lightening the intensity, the harshness of the words by use of other words is called euphemism. So they had used such kind of euphemisms. Eupheistic style was his characteristics, and which marks him as a pioneer of this style. Pioneer means the first person, the new person. The beauty of the style lies in the perfect use of balanced phrases. What is the beauty? The beauty of his style lies in that he has used such balanced phrases. Phrases are the groups of words. He used such kind of language which is balanced. Intricate alliteration. Alliteration is repetition of consonant sounds like, wild west wind. Here is the repetition of W sound. So intricate means closely connected alliterations. Classical allusions. Allusion is a reference from the past, reference from any past text. So he has used classical allusion and ornate epithets. Epithets means abusive language. So ornate means abusive language that is used in some kind of speech is called. So his style has these characteristics, that he used balanced phrases, intricate alliteration, classical allusion, and ornate epithets. Number 2, we have Sir Philip Sidney. Sir Philip Sidney's Arcadia. Arcadia is kind of a pastoral romance, means it is a kind of light or adventurous story that happened to occur in villages in pastoral areas. The first pastoral romance in English was modeled on Spanish pastoral romance. So it means although he has written this romance in English, but he was inspired and he had modeled his work Spanish pastoral romance he had modeled this work on Spanish pastoral romance. Sidney's Arcadia may better be called a piece of poetry in the form of prose. So Sidney's Arcadia means pastoral romance may better be called, it is a piece of poetry in the form of prose. It is a poetry which is written in the form of prose. As I said earlier that these two are the most famous, but there are other prose writers as well. So why they were famous? John Lilly was famous because of his style. He is famous because he has written a piece of poetry in the form of prose. However, it could exert great influence upon the drama of the age. So such kind of prose had an influence on the drama of that age. We had studied about it in the previous lecture. Yes, what is poetry next? We are done with the prose and prose writers of Renaissance age. Now we will discuss poetry. Okay, a literary work in which the expressions of feelings and ideas is given intensity by the use of distinctive style and rhythm. Poems collectively or as a genre of literature is called as poetry. Alright, so it is a literary work where there is an expression of the feelings, like what you feel. For example, what I feel right now, or what I have feelings about certain thing. It can be about my studies, it can be about my job, whatever. If I want to put it into my writing, and specifically in a very rhythmic writing, having some rhyme scheme which can be sung as well, which I can sung. Okay, so such kind of writing is called as prose. You talk about your own feelings, your opinions, and if you just put it into some kind of artistic way, like it has a specific length, my sentences have specific length, and it also contain some rhythm, so that is what we call as poetry. Okay, so Renaissance poetry. So what are the characteristics, what is the speciality of Renaissance poetry? Let's discuss. The Elizabethan poetry neither classical nor romantic. We cannot say that they have some kind of poems which relate to the classical poetry. Classical means poetry related to the Greek literature. Nor romantic. Romantic means the poetry that is based on the nature, on the beauty, on the appreciation of beauty, such kind of. So they do not have such kind of resemblance. It lacks the restrict and economy. They do not follow some kind of restrictions, rules that they had to, because along with rhythm, along with having the musical effect of the poems, they also used to compose poems in the blank verse. So what is blank verse? Blank verse is just a straight line. It is a verse of the poetry which is not rhymed, it is unrhymed, where there is no musical effect. The mental repose of the finest classical art, but following the main tradition of antiquity and the Middle Ages. So what happened? The mental repose of although they had such some a bit of classical art in their things of classical art in their poetry, but they followed the tradition of antiquity and Middle Ages between classical and Renaissance poetry, between the, like when we say Middle English or such kind of. So they had inspired, they got the things from these Middle English writers and then poets, and then they started writing their own poems. It is addressed to reason as a universal moral guide. The Elizabethan poet is continually reasoning, persuading, demonstrating analogies. So what they did, the Elizabethan poets did reasoning, means they started talking about such subjects based on the logics, based on reasons. They started talking about such serious subject, like subjects of the religion, subjects of the politics, subjects of the universe, subject of love. So they started talking about such. Okay, demonstrating analogies means comparing two things, and they compared two things in such a way that John Donne had compared his life with the his lover with the with the this sun. He compared himself with the sun. All right. And logical connection in a sense that there are certain kind of logic, there is some kind of reason, and they do not talk about things from themselves, rather they had some kind of logical connection. Even his imagery and rhythm are marshaled into argument. So what happened? Rhythm and imagery is a figurative device in which you feel like there are certain kind of images in front of you and you feel that you are watching that. That is what we call as imagery. So it is marshaled, it is combined into amalgamated to form an argument. Okay, here we have the poets of Renaissance age. The poets who contributed much to the growth of Elizabethan poetry were Sir Thomas White, Earl of Surrey, Sir Philip Sidney, Edmund Spenser, William Shakespeare. Okay, first we have Thomas White. His date of birth is from 1503 to 1542. Thomas White was the first person who introduced the sonnet in English poetry by restoring beauty, grace, and nobility to English poetry. Thomas White was the first person who introduced a sonnet in English poetry. Sonnet is a 14 lines poem in English literature which has a specific structure, like it contains sexes and octaves, means a stanza of having 8 lines and stanza of having 6 lines. Alright, there are also quatrains as well, stanza of having 4 lines. Okay ji. So Thomas White was the first person who introduced sonnet in English poetry by restoring beauty, grace, and nobility to English poetry. White's love sonnet 96 in all were published posthumously in 1557 in Tottel's Miscellany. Tottel's Miscellany was a collection of poems in which White's love sonnets, almost 96 sonnets, were published after his death. These love sonnets of White paved the way for love sonnets of Sidney and Spenser. So he was the first person who introduced sonnet in English literature, and after that, Sidney and Spenser followed his style of sonnets. In them, the fire of love was burned with the glow, and it was the credit of White that he imparted emotion, passion, fervor, and enthusiasm to English poetry. So, what happened? There was a fire of love, means they showed such kind of emotion and passion in their poems that it was felt that they are glowing, and it was the credit of White that he imparted emotion. So, he was the first person who said that through poetry we can communicate our emotions and passions and enthusiasm. Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, 1517 to 47. He was the second person who was inspired from the Italian literature. So, what happened? Surrey Henry Howard, the poet, was son of Thomas Howard. His work consists of sonnets and miscellaneous poems in various meters, notable for their grace and finish. So, his work consists of sonnets, all right, and miscellaneous means sonnets and other poems, and they are in various meters which are notable for grace and finish. He shared with White the merit of bringing the sonnet from Italy into England. Along with Thomas White, they brought sonnet into the English literature and they borrowed it from the Italian literature. He was the first English poet to use blank verse in his translation of the two books of Aeneid. So he used blank verse. What is blank verse? Blank verse is unrhymed verse. You can say unrhymed verse of the poetry which do not have musical effect. Rather, they are written straightforwardly. Next, we have Sir Philip Sidney. His time period extends from 1554 to 1586. Sir Philip Sidney, that is his lifespan. Okay, his first finest achievement in poetry was Astrophel and Stella. Astrophel and Stella is a collection of 108 love sonnets. It is a collection of songs and sonnets evidently addressed to one person. So it is a collection of poems which contain 108 love sonnets, all right, and they are addressed only to the one person. Like all these sonnets, they are addressed to one person. The sonnets of Sidney show passion for Penelope. It means that one person is Penelope, for whom he had written 108 sonnets, and who she was by time the wife of Lord Rich. Lord Rich was a political person at that time, and his wife was Penelope. He had written those poems for her. The publication of Astrophel and Stella at once caught the imagination of the people and gave rise to the voyage of the sonnet. So these publications gave imagination to the people that this is, now it's a collection of 108 sonnets. So that became very much important and famous as well. At the same time, that sonnets and such large number of sonnets he had produced. Okay, next we have Edmund Spenser, 1552 to 1599. It was Charles Lamb who called Spenser the poet's poet, and in giving him that honored title, the Prince of English essayists was not wrong. Charles Lamb, basically he belonged to a romantic age, and he was an essay writer, a Victorian or romantic. Okay, he was an English essay writer who wrote essays. He composed essays. He said that Spenser is poet's poet. He is such a great poet that we can call him as a poet of other poets. Like poets get inspiration and they also follow his structures in their poetry. The main poetical works of Spenser are Sheffield's Calendar, The Four Hymns, Mother Husband's Tale, The Complaints, The Amureti, The Epithalamion, and the masterpiece The Fairy Queen. Yes, this Fairy Queen, it was written in honor of Queen Elizabeth. At that time, the name of this era is also the name of the queen, that is Queen Elizabeth. That is why it is called as Elizabethan age. And in that time and in her era, literature was greatly flourished, and he had written this Fairy Queen. It is an allegory. Allegory means having two meanings. So allegory means having just the literal literal meaning of the work, and also other meaning in sense that it was written for the queen. The Fairy Queen is a great work on which Spenser's fame rests. So it is because of this work that he became famous. The original plan of the poets included 24 books, each of which was to recount the adventure and triumphs of a knight who represented moral virtue. So the original plan, they wanted 24 books. So his original plan was like 24 books. All right, in which he said that I want to mention the adventure and triumphs of the knight who represented moral virtue. Okay, next we have William Shakespeare, the most famous, most important poets and dramatist of this age and of all ages, we can say. He's although he's very much famous as a dramatist, but he started his career as a poet. So he had written a poems. Sorry. So we will look into detail which poems he had written. Okay, his first two poems are Venus and Adonis, 1593, and The Rape of Lucrece, 1592. He also wrote Shakespeare sonnets, and which are also known as Shakespearean sonnet. It has its own structure. The sonnets of Shakespeare consist of 154 sonnets, all written in the form of 3 quatrains and a couplet. 3 quatrains means 12 lines and a couplet means 2, so it means 40 lines are completed here. That is now recognized as Shakespearean poetry. So he had brought innovation to the sonnet. Before that, Italian sonnet and Spenserian sonnet was written of different structure. All right, so he wrote these 2 poems and also sonnets, which are 154 in number. Okay, so I would like to conclude this lecture by saying that the Renaissance poetry was rich as it had influence on the poets of later centuries. But the prose of the Renaissance did not have the great impact that poetry and above all drama had, as they were the translations of Italian prose. As compared to the poetry and drama, the prose did not flourish much, and it was not that important because it was basically a translation of other Italian works. While if we talk about the poetry and the drama of this age, they were very famous because they talked about such subjects which were widely popular. They used such structure which became readily popular. So that is why we can say that poetry and drama of this age are way more famous as compared to other ages. All right, so that's all for today. Thank you.